In the late 1970s, hardcore porno star John Curtis Holmes was an icon of Hollywood success. Movies, money, sex and drugs.
Mr. Wad.
Johnny.
His cult status was assured until his involvement in one of the most horrific murders of the last 30 years.
It was as though somebody walked through the house with buckets of blood sloshing them.
The brutal slayings known as the Wonderland murders were, for all intents and purposes, the results of Holmes' insatiable drug addiction and his utter lack of moral judgment. We will take you inside the world of John Holmes, a simple country boy who rocketed to fame by virtue of his physical abnormality.
He had the biggest penis in adult films. It was amazing. It was a freak act.
You'll see him swallowed whole by his alter ego, Johnny Wad.
He took this character really seriously. And he comes in and he says, John Holmes here, I'm Johnny Wad. You know I have a really big dick.
You'll watch him fall headfirst into drug addiction.
The only thing John wanted to do was to do cocaine.
You'll see Holmes transform like Jekyll and Hyde into a twisted image of himself.
As we were driving, he backhanded me, called me a liar, and beat the crap out of me.
And finally, you'll be taken step by step through the macabre events that led to a slaughter so perverse and evil it shocked even the hardest homicide detectives.
The first thing that struck me was this isn't just a killing, there's a message.
This is a story of sex, drugs, money, and murder, of boogie nights gone bad. This is the story of John Holmes and the Wonderland murders.
The dream of being one of them.
From life's ambition was to be the star.
Heavily covers the public scandal.
In 1968, on the advice of a photographer, 24-year-old John Holmes started posing for adult magazines. John's unique physical feature made him a model in high demand. It was an unusual twist of fate for the skinny country boy.
He doesn't have many options. He doesn't have many skills until he discovers that he can do something with his 13-inch penis.
John was a sensation, an overnight star in the shadowy business of porn.
I'm hoping the whole time that, this is going to blow over and nothing's going to happen, and it didn't.
Holmes, in fact, wasn't satisfied with print work. He wanted to try film. So in 1970, John went to a casting call arranged by porno agent Reb Sowitz.
I had an office on Las Palmas, and 3 people one day came in the office. 2 of them, I weren't sure what they were. And John wanted to make some money, wanted to make some loops. Loops were about 40 minutes to an hour worth of sex.
In 1970, sexually explicit films were illegal. These loops were shown secretly at bachelor parties and all-male stag events. By the time John left the agent's office, Holmes had an offer to star in film loops. It was easy work. Show up, have sex, and get paid. Holmes didn't find his work morally troubling, nor did he consider on-screen sex marital infidelity.
One day he comes home and tells me that he's found what he wants to do now. And I said, John, we're married. I'm not going out and fooling around, and you're the male equivalent of a whore. And he said, well, you can't think of it that way. It's like if I were a carpenter, this is my tool.
In July 1972, porn exploded into the mainstream with the release of X-rated film Deep Throat.
When Deep Throat came out, couples went. Middle-class couples lined up around the block to go see Deep Throat.
Former porn star Gloria Leonard.
Deep Throat absolutely started it all.
Producers rushed to capitalize on porn's newfound popularity. Director Bob Chin held open casting sessions, and Holmes showed up at an audition.
I took one look at him. He was a skinny, scrawny guy with an afro hairdo, and he just was not attractive. I said, I don't think so. And he says, I think you'll reconsider. He took his pants down, and I reconsidered.
After 20 minutes scribbling on a napkin, Chin created a character, porno private detective Johnny Wad.
We got him to cut his hair a little, plaster it down with brilliantine, and tried to make him look like a private eye. So I wrote Johnny Wad because my partner, when he saw what John had, said, God, what a wad that guy has.
John was paid $75 to star as the title character in Johnny Wad. The film was shot in 2 days on a budget of $2,500.
The Johnny Wad films made a lot of money. They were blockbusters in their day.
Adult film director Jim Holliday.
John Holmes became identified as Johnny Wad, and in fact, I'd say through the first half of the 70s, Johnny Wad was better known than John C. Holmes, the actor who portrayed him. He was often mistaken for the character.
Despite their popularity, porn films were still illegal.
It was sort of this dichotomy that people were lined up and it was legal to go see these films, but if you got caught in the act of making one of the films, you could go to jail, and people did.
The pornsters hatched elaborate plots to evade the police.
It was a guerrilla style of shooting. Nobody knew where we were shooting until the day came, and we went from car to car and eventually to our location.
Marker. It was a wild and woolly business with its own distinctive customers. Photographer Joel Sussman.
There were times in this business when you work on a set and you'd look down below the camera and there'd be a mirror with Coke on it, and everyone would come by and have a hit. It was just part of that process.
Though cocaine was everywhere, Holmes did not touch the stuff at first. John Holmes was an unemployed hick with 2 bad lungs and few prospects when fate in the form of an awestruck photographer walked into his life. What happened to John can be called a fairy tale, an X-rated fairy tale.
When I first worked with him, the film Johnny Wad, he wouldn't even smoke marijuana. He smoked cigarettes, but he wouldn't touch grass. After a couple films, I found out he smoked grass, which was cool. I did too, so there's no big deal. And then he started drinking. He never drank before.
John was having the time of his life. His wife, Sharon, wasn't. She didn't like the porn business, and she didn't like the drugs. The stress made her sick.
I told him, I said, I can't accept this. What you are doing is making me ill. And I can't compromise. I won't compromise. I'll be your friend, I'll be your companion, I'll be everything but your lover.
But John refused to give up porn. Holmes was addicted to the money, sex, and adulation. He began to think of himself as Johnny Wad, the generous stud who protected the innocent from evil.
John had a very strange ego. He needed to be constantly buoyed up because of his insecurities, of his own personality.
Holmes created a romantic fictional past. The following is an excerpt from a 1982 interview with Holmes.
I was going to UCLA and starving to death.
What were you taking?
Graduate physical therapist in pediatrics, what I wound up being.
Former porn producer Julia St. Vincent.
He lied about everything he said. I mean, he was nothing but a complete liar most of the time. His feelings were a lie. What he said to people where he had been was a lie.
Writer Mike Sager.
There were really 2 John Holmeses, the one that he had manufactured and told the story. Living a privileged childhood, losing his virginity to his French nanny.
In 1975, Sharon was offered the chance to manage an apartment complex in Glendale, 5 miles from downtown Los Angeles. Sharon and John moved into a house on the property. A year later, Bill Schiller, his son, and 2 daughters moved into the building. Dawn, the oldest daughter, appears in silhouette to protect her identity.
When we were introduced, he kind of just looked me up and down and went, And I said, what? And he said, too young. And he turned around and walked out the door. And that kind of really pissed me off, you know, initially. But it did make me notice him.
Their affair began almost immediately. On one occasion, Holmes took her to see a Johnny Wad flick.
We were seated, and everybody who worked there made their turn walking past us at the aisle. And then when the first shots of him being naked showed up on the screen, I started laughing. And he nudged me in my ribs, and then he started laughing. And the both of us just giggled like little kids, and you know, and that's pretty much how he broke me into the world, understanding the world of porno.
John's wife Sharon was oblivious to the affair.
He put up a real big wall regarding Sharon. Basically, he made her unapproachable to me.
In 1977, Dawn's father left California. He sent Dawn's brother and sister to live with their mother. But Dawn stayed in Glendale. Holmes had her all to himself. By this time, Holmes was completely immersed in the porn business.
He had like standing offers for people in Hollywood where they'd say, we'll give you $1,000 to do a video a day. So we got to that point, and I think at that point, he was bored.
And that boredom eventually led him to drugs.
Slowly the cocaine started coming into the picture. He would dish out a few lines and we'd stay up all night and you know, walk the streets or something, or go camping and then come back.
As the couple's cocaine use escalated, Dawn and John would go to Hollywood clubs to score drugs. This soon led to a meeting with one of Hollywood's most powerful men, club owner Adel Nasrallah, also known as Eddie Nash.
Eddie Nash was the godfather of Hollywood. He was a Palestinian national who moved to L.A. in the 50s, and by the 60s he had a hot dog stand on Hollywood Boulevard. He quickly went from a hot dog stand on Hollywood Boulevard to owning all these nightclubs, gay nightclubs, black nightclubs, strip bars. He really controlled nightclub life in Hollywood.
Eddie was a big-time club owner who lived a big-time drug-doing life, just as you imagine. You know, girls in the house, lots of sex, lots of people coming and going. You know, the Hollywood lifestyle of the drug era.
Nash ran his drug operation out of his Hollywood home. One of Nash's customers was Scott Torson, the former lover of entertainer Liberace.
It was just incredible. I mean, it was just a rotating door that never stopped. People in and out of all hours of the night. Probably 50, 70 different people, just in and out, in and out. Money, drugs, money, drugs, money, drugs, money, drugs. Heroin, cocaine. It was just an incredible scene. It was something like out of Scarface.
A scene complete with a well-armed 300-pound bodyguard named Greg Dials. Holmes and Nash quickly became friends and business associates. Nash had drugs and John had celebrity appeal.
And I think Eddie Nash was a fan of John's. You know, John had cachet because he was the king of porn and famous, you know. And if you're a drug-dealing godfather of Hollywood nightclub life, you want a guy like John Holmes, or, you know, everybody's interested in him. And, you know, hey, here's my friend John Holmes.
There was just one problem. Holmes was addicted to coke, and before long he was in debt to Nash. And that debt would one day lead to murder. By 1979, John Holmes was not just abusing coke, he was selling it. And soon his young girlfriend, Dawn, was involved.
Then at one point I started weighing the cocaine for him and breaking them down into grams, you know, making the little gram packets.
In 1980, Eddie Nash became addicted to a form of cocaine known as freebase. Author Niles B. Gravilius.
I've interviewed numerous drug addicts. Many of them describe becoming addicted to base cocaine or crack cocaine with the first hit or the first use. And then the euphoria is never the same again thereafter. They're constantly chasing the first high that they ever obtained from that drug.
Nash became so addicted to the drug that he began to isolate himself in his house. Scott Torson, Liberace's former lover, was one of Nash's customers.
He'd never go to his clubs. The money was brought to him. The drugs were brought to him. He conducted everything out of his bedroom and the telephone.
Soon John Holmes was freebasing as well. Holmes often dragged his girlfriend Dawn along to Nash's house.
John used to make her wait in the car. You know, he basically treated her like a dog. And he would go in and use freebase cocaine with Eddie Nash for literally days on end.
He would come out and pretend to get something from the car and drop me a rock or two to keep me going while I was in the car.
John carried around a briefcase with butane torches and cocaine and all his paraphernalia so he could freebase wherever he went. So, you know, when you're doing that, you know, when you have a little briefcase that you carry everywhere with you, with your freebase pipes, you know, you're in it pretty seriously.
John's habit started to affect his work.
He never knew where he was. was usually loaded. So he'd come in, I don't know if he was on Quaaludes or Coke or whatever it was.
Former porn actress Sharon Mitchell recalls Holmes' behavior.
John was like one of the main stars of the movie, and we had been shooting everything but his scene because we couldn't find him for the majority of the day. I went into the closet for some reason, and he was in the closet getting high. He had been in the closet getting loaded all day long and was just terrified and just hiding and just in a real paranoid state. And that's when the seriousness of, his addiction kind of affected me.
The drug sapped John's strength and his desire for sex.
And suddenly he can't maintain an erection because of his drug addiction. You're not going to have a career. I mean, that's why they're hiring. You either can get it up or you can't.
Unable to perform, John was blacklisted from the adult film business, but he needed money to feed his habit.
He was starting to steal big things from the house. Half of my heritage from my grandparents disappeared. And I took to hiding things in strange places, like pockets and coats and that kind of thing, and darned if he wouldn't find them.
In 1980, adult film star Gloria Leonard and her husband learned firsthand about Holmes' desperation.
We stupidly made the mistake of telling him that we wouldn't be home till noon because we had a chore to do in the morning. When we did get home at noon, our house was emptied of everything. Not only all of our valuables, electronic equipment and jewelry, but virtually everything that looked like it could be worth more than $3 or $4. The toaster, the iron, the hair dryer.
The drugs made Holmes paranoid and mean.
It started off with, backhand shots while we were driving. Accusations of I only wanted the drug. I didn't love him anymore. I just wanted the drug. And of course I would deny it and I would cry.
John's world was imploding. Desperate for money, he exploited his one asset. John began hanging out in gay nightclubs.
A lot of gay men were attracted to John Holmes because he had a 13-inch penis and they wanted to hang out with him and give him cocaine and hopefully they could sleep with him. And I'm sure if you gave John Holmes enough cocaine, you could sleep with him.
Holmes not only prostituted himself, but Dawn as well.
He ended up beating me so bad a bunch of times in order to get me out and turn tricks. He taught me what to do. He told me what to say. He told me what to be careful of. He told me how much. And then after I was done, I'd come back and give him the money, and he'd beat the crap out of me. Afterwards, I'd come back and he'd put me in the bathtub and just scrub me with boiling hot water, just scalding water, and scrub me down.
Though John tried to keep the cash flowing to feed his habit, he often fell short. His good friend Eddie Nash sold Holmes cocaine on credit, which John quickly used up. John became so desperate he sold Dawn to Nash. 1 week after that, John sold Dawn to a female pimp who ran a brothel in the valley.
Dawn finally realizes this is a bad, bad scene. And John's beating her up all the time. He's forcing her to have sex with people so they can get drugs. And she finally runs back home to, I believe it's somewhere in the Northwest. And she runs back to her mother. And she's finally away from John.
John called Dawn constantly, begging her to return. She refused. Without Dawn and in debt to Nash, John needed a new source for money and drugs.
He was taking to stealing luggage off the conveyor belt at LAX, Los Angeles International Airport, in order to support his drug habit.
January 1981, John was arrested while stealing a computer from a car. He was released on bail. To make matters worse, Nash cut off John's drug supply. Holmes' search for new drug connection led him to 8763 Wonderland Avenue and 43-year-old Joy Miller.
Basically, Joy Miller was this affluent woman who became a heroin addict and, took the long slide down. And she used her house on Wonderland Avenue to basically support this gang of heroin addicts.
The house was greenish stucco with a staircase outside encased in iron, and you had to push a button to get in. people would come and go from the house day and night. Again, that balcony came into play. They would just throw the drugs down and the money up.
And basically the Wonderland Avenue gang were a bunch of dope house rip-offs. They would get police badges and go rip off drug dealers, and then they would sell the drugs. So that's what they were known for.
The drug gang included Miller's boyfriend, 43-year-old Bill Deverall, a crane operator from Los Angeles, 34-year-old David Lynn, 36-year-old Ron Lanius, and 39-year-old Tracy Ray McCourt. Holmes befriended the gang, but the hardcore criminals were not impressed by the fallen porn star.
And they're basically think he's a joke, and they're making fun of him, and they're, you know, making him whip out his penis, you know, as a novelty. You know, they think this guy's a jerk, you know, but they keep him around, you know, as this kind of pet.
In early 1981, John was given one last chance to work in his chosen profession. Former girlfriend Julia St. Vincent hoped that John's comeback film, Exhausted, would save her production company from bankruptcy.
He was very difficult. We set a shoot up with about 25 crew members. He comes in late. He's a complete mess. We put him into makeup. He's frantic and, you know, flipping out about everything that we wanted.
He was totally incapable of working. But the producer had spent about $3,000 to secure this location. He was by the phone the whole time, waiting for a call. When the call came, he says, I have to leave just for 15 minutes. I'll be back in 15 minutes. I've just got to go to a place nearby. It's on Wonderland.
John Holmes hit rock bottom in 1981. Although his girlfriend had returned, his dealer had cut him off. His new drug connection mocked and ridiculed him, and his comeback sex film was a disaster. John thought he had fallen as far as he could. He was wrong. While freebasing with Ron Lanius, Bill Deverall, David Lind, and Tracy Ray McCourt, Holmes laid out his plan for a score. It was a simple robbery, the victim drug dealer Eddie Nash. On June the 28th, 1981, Holmes went to Nash's house on the pretense of scoring some coke.
John goes there, spends a night freebasing cocaine with Eddie Nash, and before he leaves the sliding glass door open so the gang can come to the house and go in through the sliding glass door and hold Eddie Nash up, basically.
At 5 a.m., John returned to Wonderland, expecting the crew to immediately leave for Nash's, but they were too doped up to do anything but sleep. Finally, at 8 a.m., the gang got their act together and left for Eddie Nash's house. The drive lasted 10 minutes. The group entered Nash's house using the back door Holmes had left open.
And they have San Francisco police badges, which they flash. And they say, this is a bust, you're under arrest, you know. And they quickly tie up Eddie Nash.
Nash led the robbers to his secret stash.
They found the safe where the $100,000 worth of cocaine and a vial of pure heroin was, and about $100,000 in jewelry and cash. And they really got off with a big score.
Within 20 minutes, the thieves were on their way back to Wonderland, just 1 mile away.
They only made one mistake. They didn't kill Eddie Nash and Gregory Dawes. They let them live.
At Wonderland, the loot was divided, with John receiving far less than he thought he deserved.
And I think Holmes is extremely upset because he set up this thing and he finds out that they, you know, got $100,000 worth of coke, and here he's just got a few grams from it.
Holmes took what little was offered and met up with Dawn in the San Fernando Valley.
He came up into the apartment. Of course, we went into the bathroom again, and he uncovered one of the largest piles of cocaine I'd ever seen. He was very high, very haggard looking again, but very, very high. And he started dishing out the cocaine like nothing happened, like nothing changed.
Later that morning, Nash and his bodyguard freed themselves.
Eddie Nash was, again, a big drug doer. He was a Palestinian with a lot of pride. He was kind of a godfather of his own world. And He was anyone is incensed when a robber comes in, but he was particularly incensed.
Liberace's lover, Scott Torson, often traded Liberace's personal belongings for freebase. He claims to have been at Nash's house on the day of the robbery.
He was very angry, and he told me that he had been robbed. And he had sent dials out because they found out that John Holmes had set the robbery up.
That same evening, Nash's men tracked Holmes down. Torson was still at Nash's when John was dragged in.
The next thing I know is that Dials had barged in the front door with Holmes by the back of the neck, marched him right into Nash's bedroom, and then that's when I was asked to leave. And so I went into the living room, and I could actually hear him. I mean, Nash had a violent temper. He was screaming. He was threatening to kill John. He was threatening to kill every member of his family. Dials was beating the hell out of him. He was slamming his body. You know, you could hear the furniture. You could actually hear him slamming him up against the walls.
An hour later, Holmes was led out of the bedroom.
Dials had him by the back of the neck, escorting him out. And Dials had a big, I don't know if it was a bat or a pipe in his hand.
Dials allegedly borrowed Torson's car and drove over to the Wonderland residence with Holmes and 2 other men. It was now approximately 4 a.m. on July the 1st, 1981.
John punched in the security code, and they said, "Who is it?" And he said, "It's John Holmes," and they let him in. They weren't suspicious at all. They were really not suspecting that they were going to be attacked.
But they were attacked. Lind and McCourt weren't home. McCourt was staying at his own place, and Lind was on his way to appear before a Sacramento court. Barbara Richardson was watching television when the attackers entered. Unlike the others in the house, Richardson was not a drug dealer. She was there to visit David Lind. The 3 killers, carrying metal pipes, beat Richardson to death, then attacked Joy Miller and Billy Deverell, who were asleep in their bedroom. Finally, they set on Ron Lanius and his wife Susan, down from Sacramento to visit her estranged husband. As the killers moved through the house, they left in their wake a river of blood. Neighbors later reported hearing screams, but they chalked up the noise to normal drug-dealing activities.
It's very telling of the nature of Los Angeles and its people, at least its upscale people at the time, that when the screams were heard from the Wonderland house, that some of the neighbors reported later thinking that it was just primal scream therapy and not anything to do with crime.
The beatings lasted well over an hour. The killers left only when they felt certain that everyone was dead. At about 5 a.m., the killers returned to Nash's house with Holmes.
When they brought Holmes back, you know, I noticed that there was blood on Holmes. I noticed that there was blood on Gregory Dials.
Holmes was upset and scared. John went to the only safe place he knew, his wife's apartment. It was early on the morning of July the 1st, just hours after the murders, when Holmes knocked on her door.
He was bloody. Face, a lot of blood on the clothes, you know, that kind of thing. And I asked him what happened, and he said, "I had an accident." You know, and I said, "Well, how did you get here?" And he said, "Well, the car's okay." And he said, "I'd like to clean up, and I need to, you know, change my clothes."
Sharon ran John a bath and sat in the bathroom talking to him.
I said, "This isn't a car accident. What happened?" And he said, "Well, I have to tell you, I saw 4 people murdered." Then it starts spilling out, you know, like, okay, it's confession time and you've got to get it all out because, you know, it hurts too much to have it there.
As the sun rose over Los Angeles, 4 victims lay dead inside the house on Wonderland Avenue. Miraculously, one victim, Susan Danius, was still clinging to life.
The crime was not reported to the police until the evening of the next day. Meanwhile, everybody in the world apparently went through that house. When I say that, friends of the residents of the house, dopers, went through the house, stole the dope, stole some money, walked over the bodies, and no one called the police.
Finally, at 3:52 p.m. on the afternoon of July the 1st, 1981, nearly 12 hours after the brutal assault, the crime was reported to the police.
A woman's moans were heard by a mover who was working next door. He went to the house on Wonderland Avenue and found a woman beaten almost to death.
Across town, John Holmes left his wife's house and made his way back to the Hollywood motel room where he'd left his 21-year-old girlfriend, Dawn.
And he looked terrible. It was daylight when he came back. His eyes were bloodshot. His face was just pale, and his demeanor was very dejected.
Early next morning, July the 2nd, the cops caught a break.
David Lind was a biker from the Sacramento area. David Lind revealed to us that he and Ron Launius and Bill Deverall had robbed a local purported narcotics dealer by the name of Ed Nash. He then brought up John Holmes and alluded to John Holmes being a so-called intermediary between the group up at Wonderland where the killings happened, the victims, and Ed Nash.
The cops put out an all-points bulletin for John Holmes. Finally, they tracked him down at the Hollywood motel.
John was sitting on the bed facing the door, and all of a sudden I heard this like giant explosion, and I thought it was a bomb. I jumped into his lap and grabbed a hold of him, and we were pressed up against the wall, and the police yelled, "Freeze."
Dawn was booked but quickly released. Meanwhile, John languished in jail overnight.
The next day we got a phone call from John in jail, and he said, "You have to get me out. You have to come up with a bail." He said, "They're going to kill me. I've had several death threats already."
But before Dawn and Sharon could raise the bail money, Holmes apparently changed his mind. In exchange for witness protection, he would tell the cops everything. The police officers called Sharon and Dawn.
They said they had John in protective custody. He was willing to give them some information, but he wasn't going to do it until he could speak to both Sharon and I together.
Dawn and Sharon both agreed to meet Holmes. Officers picked the women up, brought them to the Bonaventure Hotel in downtown Los Angeles.
For the next couple of days, we just kind of sat around very quiet. We all slept in the same bed with John in the middle. We had our meals served to us, you know, with guards with guns or cops with guns.
John kept stalling the detectives. After 2 nights, the police switched hotels. By the 5th day, the police still weren't getting anywhere with John.
He took full advantage of this type of treatment, and essentially we never got out of him what we wanted to get out of him and what we knew that he had.
Things broke down at that point. They didn't believe what he was telling them. They just basically brought us back.
The cops set Dawn, John and Sharon free with a stern warning. John and Dawn were nearly ready to skip town, but John wanted more money. Holmes was so desperate that he was willing to risk his life.
John came up with the idea that Eddie Nash would possibly give us some money. We drove to the coffee shop just below Eddie Nash's house in Laurel Canyon, and John concocted this plan.
Incredibly, Holmes wanted to ask Nash for more getaway money, his insurance policy, an outrageous lie.
His idea was to tell him that someone was waiting for him if he didn't show up in an hour, that this person had letters that was going to be mailed to all these other people with information about Eddie.
Holmes left Dawn at the coffee shop. She grew more frightened and nervous with each long minute. Finally, after an hour and a half, John returned.
Well, he said he went up and he approached Eddie about giving him the money. And that Eddie said, "Why should I give you any money? Why shouldn't I kill you right here?" And he said that a gun was put to his head and he was made to beg for his life.
According to Holmes, Nash finally agreed to give him $3,000. John and Dawn were supposed to wait 30 minutes, then check Nash's mailbox.
Inside was an envelope. There was half of what he'd asked for. So from there, we just started driving.
The shaken couple made a beeline for John's sister's house in Montana. He thought it was safe, but the law was on his heels. Back in Los Angeles, the cops were turning up the heat on club owner Eddie Nash. By October 1981, LAPD criminalists connected John Holmes to the murder scene. His palm print was found in one of the bedrooms. Police knew from informants that one of the victims, Ron Lanius, had always been cruel to Holmes, forcing him to display his penis at parties, as if Holmes was a circus animal.
There appeared to be sufficient evidence to file murder charges on Holmes.
The cops now wanted Holmes badly. He'd never appeared in court on his 1981 computer theft charge, so they used this as a pretext for an arrest warrant.
We got a phone call from Ohio, from his mother, saying that the police had just been there, and the FBI, and that they were looking for us, and that we were considered armed and drug-crazed.
The couple took off for Florida, acting less like fugitives and more like newlyweds, stopping at all the famous tourist spots.
He was back to his old self. He was, fun to be around. We stopped at places like the Grand Canyon. We stopped at the Petrified Forest. We did a bunch of fun stuff again.
But when money ran out, Holmes returned to his old ways. He started committing petty theft and breaking into cars. In one vehicle, John found a gun which he kept as protection. After 3 weeks, they reached their destination.
We arrived in North Miami Beach on Collins Avenue, and we pulled up to a transitional hotel called the Fountainhead.
John found work as a carpenter at a nearby construction site.
But it just seems really like a few weeks, basically. When I suspected John was using again, he seemed more stressed out when he came back at night. Pretty soon he started making suggestions about some of the hotels that were across the street. And pretty soon he was making suggestions about, well, if a girl was to walk on the beach, she could probably make some money. I kind of turned a deaf ear to that kind of talk.
But Holmes' suggestion became a command.
He insisted that I go out on the beach. I refused, and I started crying, and I said, no, I'm not going to do that anymore. And he ended up beating the crap out of me.
Dawn worked the beaches of North Miami, using a hotel up the road to turn tricks.
He'd take the money and he'd put me in the bathtub and scrub me up, and basically, he just cried a lot. He hated having me to put me out there, he said, but we really needed the money because we have to go.
After weeks of working the beach, Dawn finally refused.
He started to beat me up, and I ran out the door, and I ran all the way down by the pool, and he caught up with me by my hair and beat the crap out of me right in front of everyone who we lived with or lived around.
No one helped. John left a few hours later.
That's the last time I saw John.
Dawn moved in with a stripper friend and gave police the address of John's hotel. In December 1981, LAPD officers finally found 37-year-old John Holmes hiding out in Florida. Holmes was arrested and returned to Los Angeles, where he faced a tough choice: inform on Eddie Nash or be charged with murder. But Holmes refused to cooperate. He was scared to death. On December the 8th, 1981, to pressure Holmes to change his mind, John was officially charged with murder. That same day, bodyguard Gregory Diles was arrested, but police were forced to release him because the DA's office felt there was insufficient evidence. Holmes, however, was kept in custody and placed in a special ward in the LA County Jail, a unit reserved for high-profile prisoners. Even among these infamous killers, John was a celebrity.
I was excited. I had seen his movies in years past.
WONDERLAND was John's jailhouse psychologist.
And I'm kind of ashamed to admit that I should be excited to see this porn star. But he was a celebrity, and it was kind of a fun idea.
Various deputy sheriffs were going to John Holmes, getting his autograph. Oh my God, this was a murderer. He should be treated as a murderer. So I was upset at that.
Holmes became a prison trustee, but moving around the jail delivering magazines was sometimes dangerous.
One time somebody tried to stick a pencil in his eye, and another time they went after him with a shank, a little weapon knife they had made, and so they moved John to a single cell.
Though these incidents were never connected to Nash, they reinforced John's fears that even in jail, those who wanted him dead could kill him. After 6 months in jail, John Holmes' murder trial began on June the 3rd, 1982. Screw magazine publisher Al Goldstein covered the trial for Playboy.
The atmosphere in the courtroom was fascination. It's a murder trial. is a celebrity murder trial. You've got a porno actor who not only is charged with murder, he jumps bail. He's in hiding for months. It was like a bad novel.
A bad novel Los Angeles couldn't put down. Pat Morrison reported on the trial for the Los Angeles Times.
There were so many things about this case that had not happened before or that caught the public's attention. For one thing, when this finally came to trial, it was the first time ever in the history of the American judicial system that videotape of the murder scene, the crime scene, was admitted as evidence. And what that videotape showed was this blood-strewn upscale house in which 4 people had been beaten to death by steel pipes and baseball bats, another person critically wounded.
Prosecutor Ron Cohen.
It just showed how horrible murder can be. That was very, very strong. We knew what the murder weapon was because the bodies had threads on them. It was a pipe, a threaded pipe. The bodies actually on the wounds had the threads of the pipe embedded in them.
It was blood all over. I remember I threw up twice. I mean, particularly gruesome. It was not just the murder of these people, but it was a murder that the perpetrators enjoyed doing.
On June the 7th, Susan Lanius, the miracle survivor, took the stand.
She would never be able to identify anyone. About as close as we got, she recalled noises, thumping noises. She recalled shadowy figures coming at her.
Star witness David Lind linked John Holmes to the robbery at drug dealer Ed Nash's and the murders on Wonderland Avenue.
He would not be bullied on the stand. He would not be intimidated by anybody. Without a doubt, I think David Lind initially was the strongest witness.
The prosecutor seemed to have a strong circumstantial case against Holmes. Holmes claimed he was only present at the murders because he feared for his life. But according to Prosecutor Cohn, the distinction was irrelevant.
Duress is not a defense to murder. Somehow the defense was able to argue it.
Holmes' lawyers called no witnesses, but in their closing arguments, the defense attorneys repeated charges that the real killers who also threatened John Holmes were still at large. On June the 25th, 1982, almost a year after the murders, John Curtis Holmes was found not guilty.
I was so shocked when I was not guilty. And here I was, a young deputy district attorney. I walk out into a milieu of TV cameras and lights, and I have microphones stuffed into my face saying, well, how do you feel? And the only thing I remember saying is, well, the sun will rise tomorrow. I was too much in shock.
Now a free man, Holmes had nothing. No career, no money, no women. So he returned to what he knew best, sex films. Former film actor Bill Margold.
Welcome back, hail, hail, the king is alive. He was tired, but again, he was still able to function because within the same time frame, Misty Dawn, on the set of Marathon in San Francisco, says, I can't wait to get that man up my ass.
Porn star Ron Jeremy recalls it was a tense time for Holmes.
He was afraid that there was people out to hurt him, because supposedly the whole thing between him and Ed Nash and Greg Dials. So he had a gun. He had a gun on him. His assistant Bill Emerson had a gun. All these guys are packing.
In 1984, John also did something he'd never done before. He made a feature-length gay sex movie.
John Holmes did a movie, a gay film, for a company called Paradise Visuals. And the actor he worked with in that movie supposedly got ill, too, from a virus.
In July 1986, Holmes was diagnosed with AIDS, but he didn't let the disease stop his work. When rumors about his HIV status circulated around Los Angeles, John went to Italy and made films with the country's most famous sex star, Ciccolina.
The thing that really is a horror story, what makes it so horrendous is that, you know, John Holmes knew he had the virus and he went across the ocean to work with Ciccolina. He actually had sex with her, and I talked to her years afterwards, and she thought he was a total creep for that.
Detective Tom Lang also learned of John's illness. Lang hoped the specter of death would cause Holmes to reveal the truth.
He played it to the hilt all the way to the end. Never got a straight answer out of him. It was all crap right up to the moment he died.
After the death of Holmes in March '88, Dials remained under the watchful eye of the LAPD until he died of liver failure in 1997. That same year, a joint federal, state and local task force began re-examining the Wonderland murders. As a result, in early 2000, a federal grand jury indicted Nash on charges of running a racketeering enterprise for 25 years. The 16-count indictment also accused Nash of ordering the Wonderland murders. 71-year-old Nash was arrested at his home in Tarzana, California. Nash pled guilty to all charges and was jailed awaiting trial in 2001. John Holmes' ex-wife Sharon retired from a career in nursing. Holmes' girlfriend Dawn pulled her life together. She is now sober, married, and a mother of a young child.
Drug addiction is really powerful. It can change your life in an instant without you even being aware of what's happened. Not a lot of people make it. I consider myself one of the lucky ones.
John Holmes was an addict who beat his girlfriend, a thief who got mixed up in a brutal murder, a porn star who continued to work even after he knew he had AIDS. And yet even today, he remains a hero to many.
It's difficult to imagine the industry without him because everybody has aspired to be him, because everybody has wanted to be the king, but there's only been one king.
Others, including former porn producer Julius and Vincent, feel differently.
He wanted the real person of you to show. He wanted to rip your heart out and find out what it was made of. He wanted your soul.
If they think who he was and what he did and the sum total of his life was heroic, they're mentally defective. I'm sorry. I can't say anything else.